Welcome to the Department of Geosciences Colloquium. Today we have with us Lisa Montefiore from NC State, where she's a PhD candidate in biological and agricultural engineering. And it's also important to note that she is a Southeast Climate Adaptation Science Center Global Change Fellow. So those of you who are involved in the NRT are familiar with that cohort of graduate students and the broader CCAS kind of mission. So without further ado, we'll pass it on to Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. So hello, everyone. So as you can say, my name is Lisa Montefiore, and I'm doing my PhD in North Carolina State University. And I am working with Dr. Nathalie Nelson. Nathalie Nelson, sorry, I have something with my computer. Okay. So Dr. Nathalie Nelson is leading the Biosystems Analytics Lab. So in her lab, we are using a lot of data-intensive, management focus, and interdisciplinary approach to the study of complex biological system dynamics. So in her lab, we are doing various different types of work, like water quality and water quantity modeling using different approaches such as process-based modeling or machine learning. Other people are also studying crop modeling, and also we are aiming to develop decision support tools to help some stakeholders with environmental issues. Like for example, she's developing the Shellcast decision support tool for the North Carolina shellfish mariculture industry. And me, my focus is mostly in water quality modeling. And today I will present one part of my dissertation, project that will be in my dissertations, where I am aiming to reconstruct the historical growth of swine concentrated animal feeding operations in North Carolina. So I will start with some definitions. So what are concentrated animal feeding operations for those who are not aware about it? So according to the US Environmental Protection Agency, feeding CAFO, feeding concentrated animal feeding operation, CAFO, a facility or a lot where the animals are contained and fed for 45 days or more in any 12 months period. That means that the crops, the vegetation, the forage growth or post-harvest residues are not sustained in the normal growing seasons over any portion of the lot of facility. So the feed is brought to the animals rather than the animals are grazing on grasslands or pastureland, etc. And also to the notion of that animals are confined, a CAFO is a facility that contains more than 1,000 animal units. So 1,000 animal units will depend on the type of species and their weight. So according to the US EPA, 1,000 animal units will correspond to 2,500 swine weighing over 55 pounds, or it's also equivalent to 125,000 broiler chickens. But also facilities that contains less than 1,000 animal units or more can be considered as a CAFO if it's discharged manure or wastewater into a natural or man-made ditch, a stream or other waterways, and regardless of the size. So here you can see the CAFO in the distribution of the CAFO in the United States. So you can see that we have CAFO sorted across the United States, and they are notably concentrated in the Midwest. But also we have some CAFO in North Carolina. It is well to notice that most of the livestock projections now come from the CAFO infrastructures. So when we are zooming in North Carolina, we can see that hog CAFO are very important. We have an extreme density of the livestock animals here in the coastal plain mainly, and also we have broiler CAFO in a high quantity. But in North Carolina, we observe less cattle, dairy, and egg CAFO. So you can see here that the hog and the broiler CAFO are very important for the economy of North Carolina because they represent, so North Carolina is ranked second in the production of hog in the entire United States and fourth for the production of broiler. So when we look at the swine and the poultry CAFO, they differ in some respects. So they share the same defining features of the animal confinements. So you can see that the CAFO have several petallic buildings. So in general, the number between 2 and 6. And for swine CAFO, like you can see here, each building can contain between 800 and 1200 pigs. And the urine and the feces extracted by the hogs fall into an underground storage pit below the barn. And notably, especially in North Carolina, the waste is transferred into an open-air retention pond or lagoon, as you can see in this picture. And these lagoons can store millions of gallons of animal waste. And the waste is then naturally teeming with bacteria, and engineers can manipulate the pH, temperature, nutrients, etc. to favor helpful bacteria that can anaerobically digest the waste. So then the sludge is periodically removed and applied to land, as you can see them. So the resulting fields are called spray fields, and they are here to absorb the nutrients contained here. So in North Carolina, we have over 2,000 swine operations that use this kind of waste management systems. So this is one of the differences between poultry CAFO and hog CAFO, that poultry CAFO, they are mostly dry litter. We do not see in general this type of liquid waste disposal compared to the hog CAFO. So the CAFO that have the waste disposal systems using liquid, they are recognized as the point source of pollution, and so they require a water quality permit. So North Carolina has the strongest permit program, and so most of the swine CAFO are covered by the North Carolina Swine Waste Management System General Permit that requires the annual inspection of every facility, and that is valid for 5 years. So every 5 years there's an inspection, and the permit is renewed or not. So this map shows you the permitted CAFO in North Carolina. And if you remember the previous heat map I showed you about the poultry and swine CAFO in North Carolina, you can see that most of the permitted CAFO are swine. It is because, as I told you, the poultry CAFO have in general dry litter, and they are not using most of the time the waste disposal system as for swine CAFO. So swine CAFO has a very important economic importance for North Carolina, but they also raise some environmental concerns, namely with the air pollutions and the water pollutions. So the swine CAFO and with the waste management system, they are responsible for quite a non-negligible quantity of greenhouse gas emissions. So it is well known that worldwide that the livestock farming plays a significant role in the global anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions that were estimated to account for 9% of the carbon dioxide emissions and 35 to 40% of methane emissions. And unlike dry litter manure treatment that we can see in other livestock structures, the lagoon system used in swine CAFO rely on anaerobic digestion to break down the waste, and that's release methane as the byproducts. And on a global scale, anaerobic digestion emits 17.5 million metric tons of methane, and it was estimated that over half of which comes from pig waste. Besides greenhouse gas emissions that can contribute to climate change, we have also particulate matters that are formed with the ammonia emissions can combine with other atmospheric substances. And we can lodge deeply within the lung tissues that can create some health issues. And besides the health issues, we can also have some social issues with the odor that can be detected up to 6 miles away from a CAFO, and that impacts all the surrounding communities. So from the air pollution, we have also the water pollutions with the CAFO that account for 11.8% of the North Carolina impaired waters. The animal waste contains a suite of contaminants, including nutrients, pathogens, antibiotics, hormones, etc., and also biogeochemical oxygen-demanding materials. And so these contaminants can reach water sources, surface water and groundwater. And as a result, we can see a lot of eutrophication with the increase of organic matter that can increase the algal growth and also the depletion in oxygen. So North Carolina is particularly vulnerable to water quality degradations because North Carolina is located in a region where we can see extreme precipitation like tropical storm, hurricane. So these punctual events can be very destructive. We can see the waste lagoons that can overflow or break, and the damage can take years to the region to recover. But also, we have also more gradual and long-term contaminations. It's about 95% of the swine CAFO in North Carolina that are located in the low-lying eastern coastal plain. And this region has low-lying lands and porous and sandy soil that can be more prone to flooding, even if we do not have hurricane or tropical storm, and also more contamination. So the groundwater, notably when they are spraying the waste. So the swine CAFO have a lot of environmental impacts that can impact the communities. And also in this region, where we have most of the CAFOs, the vulnerability was found to be high, over 0.75 for 1. So it was a social vulnerability index score that took into account 15 social factors like poverty, lack of vehicle access, etc. So these communities are initially already vulnerable due to socioeconomic factors, and they are impacted by environmental factors due to the soil. Okay. So here, this is a curve that shows you the evolution of the hog inventory and North Carolina swine industry growth. So you can see it start, we got about 1 million of hog in the 90s and the 60s. And then at the end of the 80s until the beginning of the 90s, we observed a big jump in the North Carolina swine production. And so in 1997, a moratorium was established on the construction or the expansion of swine and farms of lagoon. And this moratorium was then extended until 2007, when it was made permanent to control the construction of this swine farm, and that required lagoons to be permitted. So prior 1997, the location of swine CAFO are unknown, and the data are only available at the county scales of the USDA Ag Census. But we do not have the exact year of construction of operation of this CAFO and their associated waste lagoons. And if we have this spatially explicit information, it will improve our understanding of long-term water and air quality change, because as I tell you, we have also a gradual and contamination over time. And it will also allow to better characterize the economic transitions that occurred in North Carolina over the past few decades, and support additional retrospective analysis related to North Carolina agriculture. So such type of information will be very valuable. So to do that, we are thinking like swine CAFO. They are characterized by liquid man-made pits, as you can see here, and they have proximity to the dam. So lagoons are easily spotted on the landscape from the sky because lagoons are very brownish, sometimes pink color, and the shape, the rectangular shape and the bands, you can very easily identify them in North Carolina. And for that, we are thinking maybe we could use satellite images to reconstruct the historical growth of Swan Keiko prior to 1997, where we didn't know the year of construction of this lagoon. So the first step was to choose the satellite. So for the satellite, you have the Landsat program, which is the longest running enterprise for the acquisition of satellite imagery of Earth. It was launched, the first one was launched in July 1972. And since 1972, the landscape satellites have provided repetitive, synoptic, and global coverage of high resolution, multispectral imagery. And we chose the Landsat 5 satellite from the Landsat, different Landsat satellite, because you can see that it is the longest satellite that was run from 1984 to 2013. And these dates coincide pretty well when we observe the dramatic increase in the hog inventory in North Carolina. So Landsat 5 has, as I told you, a long time data collections, but also we have a spatial resolution of 30 meters, which is pretty good. So we can capture the size of the West Lagoons that are longer than 30 meters for each side. Also, we have a temporal resolution that is pretty high. We have one image every 16 days. So that means that we can collect several in at least 2 images a month. So we can have a dozen of images a year. So here, this is a picture. So on the left, you can see a Google Earth image that has a very high resolution. So, sorry, recent images. You can see on this image that we can very well distinguish the West Lagoons. They are pink, brown color, and the band. And here, this is the Landsat 5 images. And we really can see that in these multispectral images, they appear dark. And we can really well differentiate this feature from the landscape. And so we were thinking maybe we can use the properties of that land features that are reflecting differently in the analysis. So for that, this can be explained if you are not well into remote sensing, that each feature has different electromagnetic signatures that is highlighted in this graph. So you can see that for this range of wavelengths, the water absorbs much more than healthy green vegetation that have, especially in the near infrared, higher reflectance. So if we know the reflectance property of the value of each each feature that is different, we can discriminate well the West Lagoons from the other non-watery features like crop, and we will use these properties. So satellites like Landsat 5 are measuring the reflected radiation in different regions of the spectrum, and they are referred as bands. So we will use, notably here, the band 4 to discriminate the West Lagoons from the other landscape. So here you can see just a little example of a multi-band images that are usually displayed with a composite of red, green, and blue. And when we combine with different rainbow combinations, we can really identify the feature, like the water, so we absorb more, and the vegetation will appear red on the images, and your band can be more white. So we can have different multispectral combinations to do that. So this is here some Landsat 5 images with some multispectral combinations with the time series. So here I just select about 5 images over times, and you can see that at the beginning 1985, we can see few West Lagoons and that are increasing over times. So Landsat 5 images seems very compelling to do that. So the thing is that to access and analyze the data, North Carolina is a pretty big region. And it will require the analysis of hundreds of images. We also need the filtration of the data because we need good image with a high quality, and also images with a low cloud cover because the cloud cover can mask the information we want to see. And also the analysis can be computationally expensive. So for that, we use Google Earth Engine. So I will give you a little overview of Google Earth Engine because maybe you might be interested by it. So what is Google Earth Engine? So Google Earth Engine is a cloud-based platform for planetary scale geospatial analysis. Since Google Earth Engine came online, several groundbreaking studies have emerged and that have demonstrated the power of bringing large-scale computing to environmental and social problems. So Google Earth Engine is designed for cloud-based parallelized geospatial data analysis. It takes care of all of the infrastructure and parallelizations decision on the back end of the user. And so using the Earth Engine, you can call a wide set of functions that have been developed specifically for computing in Earth Engine and applying them over many images simultaneously. And you don't have to download the images and you don't have to analyze individual tiles at a time. And so you don't have also to stress the data on your local storage. You can just extract the output of the analysis. So it's very convenient. And so Google Earth Engine has a massive online public data archive with over 200 data sets. It gathers over 5 million images. And it is frequently updated, where we have over 4,000 new images added per day. So it includes the entire Landsat missions, but also other remote sensing missions like Sentinel-1, 2, or MODIS. And in addition to Earth observing images, Google Earth Engine can host other datasets like the precipitation, population density, some downscale climate data, etc. And you can also have some shapefiles boundary as a county, etc. And you can also import your own data if you want. One other interesting feature in Google Earth Engine is that it can back up your code in a Git repository without you having to think about it. And you can share these repositories with other users and view older versions of your code. So you can access Google Earth Engine through a few different channels, including JavaScript API and Python API, depending on your preferences. So when you use Google Earth Engine, you can write directly the command that sends that as an object to the Google for processing in parallel in their code. So you do not have to do the parallelization, as I told you, in your own computer. And you can just visualize the results from Google in their browser. You do not need to download the data because you can already do the filtration in Google Earth Engine. You can filter by dates and area of interest, and you can apply a map algorithm over collection of image, thousands of images, etc. And compute aggregate statistic on these images. So you don't have to download anything from your computer to your computer. And then it will you have automatic backup, which is very convenient. So this is what looks like Google Earth Engine. So you see it's a JavaScript GUI, which is a BERT web platform. And it's very easy to store, share your code, your different codes, and to execute your code. So here it's where you can have your different scripts. You have some documentations, etc. Assets is where you can upload some data or some shapefiles. Here, this is where you are writing your code, etc. And you have the console where you have your different messages. And what is very interesting is that you can already map some satellite images or your results here that can appear. So Google Earth Engine is a very powerful tool for analyzing remote sensing images, and it is ideal for non-computational experts because, like me, I am not. And you can apply it in numerous fields, including the animal and science. So here in this study, we will use Google Earth Engine, but to get some inputs to use in Google Earth Engine, first we needed to retrieve the locations of Swan Cave and the West Lagoons. We look at existing data sets, notably released by the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, which shows the current Swan Cave in operations. Unfortunately, they pin in the middle of the field when it belongs to a single property, the farms, but they did not ping in each farm. And also, they did not report the Swan Cave that were no more in operations. So for that, we needed to identify them visually, so the Google Earth Pro. So each lagoons were identified by a pin that were still in operations. And also, we also were able to identify the lagoons that were no more in operation in the region because they are quite characterized as a square shape, and we can still see the barn appearance here. So the identification, so one of the potential pitfall is that we could miss some lagoons by doing this visual identification, so this large area. So for that, we tried to have a rigorous method. So we did the identification county per county. Here it represents the Dublin country that has one of the highest number of Swan Cave. And we also used a grid mesh that you can see in blue, where we can know, we did grid by grid to be sure we didn't miss any Swan Cave. So this work was made by a former research assistant in the lab, Amanda Lin, who did this tremendous work. So the cave were joined to existing data sets, including the permitted data sets and other data we got that allow us to link our data to the number of barns, the number of waste lagoons of the same farm, and the type and the stage of the animal waste, and also it will allow us to estimate the amount of waste that produced. So to retrieve the year of construction of waste lagoons in North Carolina, we use the Landsat 5 images in the cloud-based platform Google Earth Engine, as I described to you. For a region, we got hundreds of images from 1984 to 2012 with a low cloud cover inferior to 5%. And on a recent Google Earth image, as I showed you just previously, we got the location of the waste lagoons was retrieved here. So here I'm just presenting the case of one waste lagoons, but the operation was automated for all of the waste lagoons in North Carolina. So the coordinate location of the waste lagoons was imported into the Landsat 5 images. And at the waste lagoons coordinates, the band 4 reflectance was extracted. So the band 4 of the Landsat 5 satellite discriminates very well water features as waste lagoons from non-water features as crop of forests that were surrounding the cave. So here you can see in this time series one dot. So it is the time series for this one waste lagoon, and one dot represent one satellite imaging, and so it represents one date. So you can see here that we have quite a good number of band 4 reflectance for these waste lagoons, and you can see a decrease here notably in the reflectance. And so this reflectance, it is when we appear that there was a shift in the band 4 in shift when the land use change from a non-watery feature to a watery features. And there will be when we have this shift, it indicates the year of construction of apparition of the waste lagoons on the satellite images. So as you can see here, before this shift, At this location in 1996, we observed just land, a crop. And just after, on the Landsat 5 images, when we check, we can really visually see that the West Lagoons appear. So the change point detection analysis were able to detect these ships to give us the date of apparition of the West Lagoons here. Briefly, so for the change point analysis detections, I didn't create a new algorithm for that. There are several algorithms that were developed previously, and I use a R package developed by Kili Katan in 2016. So in its simplest part, the change point detections can estimate the point at which the statistical properties of the sequence of observation change. And in this R package, they include many different non-parametric and frequencies methods. So here I use several methods just to compare that the different algorithms were able to find the same year for each section. So here, this is a preliminary results that show you the historical growth of SwineCAFO over time. So you can see here, you can see on the right the histogram that represents the number of West Lagoons built per year, and the dots, the cumulative number of West Lagoons over time. So we can see that it is growing up to over 2,000 West Lagoons. So then we look at the data at hydrologic, to look at the hydrologic scale within the boundaries of three important watersheds in North Carolina. So we have the Cape Fear, the Neuse, and the Tarpamninco River. And the color indicates when they were constructed. So just here we have some results since 1985, but these lagoons here before 1989, might be we are not super extremely sure of their year of construction because it was the start of the Landsat 5 image collection. And so probably a lot of these lagoons were already constructed prior this year. But what it's revealed is that West Lagoons were mostly constructed from 1990 and 1995 for the three watersheds. And in particular, the Cape Fear watershed experienced a dramatic increase in the number of West Lagoons, with over 300 West Lagoons constructed in 1991 and 280 West Lagoons in 1994. Also, results shows that a few West Lagoons were constructed in 2000. But if you remember, here you can see it's a date of 1997 where, when a moratorium was placed. So we have not a lot of West Lagoon constructed, but still we were intrigued by that, and notably because in the 2000s, we identified that the Bamford change detection algorithm got some issues because we got some noise in the data, probably because we got some clouds that can alter the reflectance value. So pre-processing are currently performed to remove one or two images that cause the problem. And also what we can observe is that we were thinking that we will observe a steady increase in the West Lagoon construction. However, we can see that you have some up and big up and some decrease in the rate of the construction over time. So it was interesting to know. We do not really know yet why. Maybe it's based on the legislation or some events, but it's something that we would like to explore. So when we look at that, so we would like also to explore the pattern construction of the SwineCAFO over time. So here you can have the urban area. So also the SwineCAFO were mostly constructed in rural area. We would like to see, we have still some urban area, and you would like to see if before the older CAFO were more constructed close to urban area, and then they expand, they were built further away from there or not. So it's something that we would like to explore for urban area. And also we would like to explore the same type of pattern for notably the distance between the CAFO age, the Swan CAFO age, and also their distance to like streams and rivers and ponds, etc. So for the validation, so currently 5% of the West Lagoons were randomly selected and visually verified with Landsat 5 images, as you can see here, exactly as I showed you here. And the results were obtained plus or minus 1 year. Because it depends on the satellite acquisition. Sometimes we can have a date that corresponds in the year 1996 in December, and the next images could just be like taken in August 1997. 87% of the year was detected accurately based on the 5% of the West Lagoons visually verified. And there's ongoing works that are being made to improve the code creative, the change point detection, like I told you, to remove some nodes that were observed too. And we would like also to perform validations to evaluate about 30% of the West Lagoons, just to make the analysis more robust and to see, to evaluate when we are increasing the number of West Lagoons. For the future work, we would like to have an applications use these data sets to evaluate the nutrients inputs generated by the Swan CAFO over time. So CAFO, as I told you, the west in the lagoons are often spread into surrounding fields. And there are several national scale studies that shows that even if we have the implementation of best management practices and the reduction of nitrogen applied to the fields, in some part of the United States, they observed that the water was still degraded and they didn't observe the improvements. And this brings to the concept of the nutrients legacy, that the nutrients accumulate into the soil and the groundwater and are released over time. So that's why with this type of long-term data set, we would like to at least have a simple and a proof of concept estimation of the nutrients that were applied on the soil that can help to understand the nutrient legacy in further studies. So for example, we would like to estimate based on the size of the West Lagoon. We could try to estimate the amount of manure and the amount of nitrogen that could be applied to this field. We would like also to develop an interactive web-based application. So this is here an example of the North Carolina Departmental Environmental Quality. So we would like to display the results and allow the user to download as tabular data the year of construction, the estimation of the year of construction of the West Lagoons. And we would like to allow them to perform simple statistical analysis at different boundary, like administrative and hydrologist boundary. And that's just to help the stakeholders or modelers to get easy access to this data. So thank you. So let me know, I can text your question now. And if you have a later question, you can still join me with my email address. And I have a website where I am updating my research, and I will post the different website published and the different papers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I left a note in the chat if any of you have questions, if you'd like to share them there first. We'll give everyone a minute. I have a question. In your process to select the Landsat 5, if you were to look at data from any of the others, do you expect that that would be or lead to any sort of different results or findings?
Can you repeat your question? Sorry, I didn't hear.
Yeah. So in your process selecting Landsat 5 imagery, do you anticipate that if you used data from any of the others that you might end up with different results or different findings?
So I don't think so. So the reason for choosing Landsat 5 is because it's a long time. It's almost the only satellite available that is freely accessible, and we have this many images. But with the methods we are using, if we had other projects that were available for this time scale, I don't think so the results will change so much. After, it will depend also of the resolution. If we have a satellite with a higher resolution, for sure we will have better results.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I would like to ask a question. Hello. So my understanding is that you have collected some reflector values from multispectral images. And I wonder that, have you ever collected any samples from lagoons and run some tests like chemical or any other analysis? I don't know, maybe it's not your purpose of your study, but have you ever tried to correlate with the reflector values from multispectral images with the tests you have run? I don't know if you have run a run test from the samples lagoons. Like first, did you collect any samples from lagoons?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
Because we are looking at the long time, so even before in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just based on the reflectance of the features, because the water features can really well allow us to discriminate them. So that's why we didn't we didn't collect samples, especially also because some lagoons, it was we want to know their date of construction, and it was 20 years ago. Like,
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Well, I will leave this on, so if you have continued questions, we can have a smaller group discussion. But let's thank our guest speaker for an excellent presentation. Thank you.
thank you.